Oso, Buju, Oso Mauniawiak, hello, and welcome back everybody to the final session and keynote of the Shifting Seasons Summit 3. We hope you all have had a great breakout session with not too many technical difficulties, and now we will be moving into our keynote session. So, Bazile Panek is a proud member of the Red Cliff Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa, and he was born and raised on the Red Cliff Reservation. Bazile is heavily involved with his culture, regularly attending ceremonies and cultural events. In recent years, he has become a leader in his community by teaching others how to play the moccasin game. Currently, Bazile is a junior studying Native American Studies with minors in sustainability and entrepreneurship at Northern Michigan University. He has had the honor to serve and participate in various committees and organizations on the NMU campus. Bazile is the current president of the Native American Student Association. He serves as the student rep on the President's Committee on Diversity, as well as on the Center for Native American Studies Curriculum Committee. Bazile has also served on various ad hoc committees and has educated many people about Native American culture, language, and history. Recently, Bazile was instrumental in advocating for the official recognition of Indigenous Peoples Day by Northern Michigan University. Please welcome Bazile Panek.
Buju Gakina, hello everyone. Miigwech, thank you for allowing me to speak at this conference. To introduce myself, Minogi Jigabo Indigo, Misquabi Kangen Dunjba, Mikaziendo Dame. So my name is Bazile Panek. I'm super happy to be here. I come from the Red Cliff Reservation, as was said in my introduction. I'm currently a student right now. I want to say Miigwech for allowing me to be this youth speaker this last kind of conference. I hope for my presentation you kind of receive some ideas of what we can carry into the future, and to kind of recognize that the youth are our future, and that's what's going to happen next, and that you all older folks are adults that have really laid an amazing foundation for the youth to move forward with. So hope you can take some of that away from my presentation. And am I good to go with everything, or was it supposed to start at 1 o'clock, or am I good?
You're good to go.
Sweet, awesome. So yeah, I'm so grateful to be presenting among some amazing individuals throughout this conference, but especially those other keynote speakers, Dr. Robin Wall-Kimmerer, Dr. Daniel Wildcat, and Winona LaDuke. These people are definitely my heroes or my celebrities, individuals whom I really look up to, and it's amazing to be presenting alongside of them. And I haven't had the chance to catch much of the last presentations because I've been in class. This is the last week of class for me, and then finals week next week. I'm actually skipping class right now to speak for this conference, which is pretty exciting whenever I get to skip class. But I apologize if I cover kind of any topics that have already been covered throughout the conference, but I know that I'll at least be able to offer some unique perspectives, or at least reinforce what has been presented. Today, I'll be sharing a PowerPoint presentation that talks about how public participation is an integral part of environmental decision-making by definitely our traditional Indigenous communities and pre-colonial times, but definitely in some Indigenous communities today. But how can we decolonize our environmental decision-making in order to make more sustainable decisions? How can we do this into the future and adapt our current environmental decision-making process? So I will share my PowerPoint now. Okay, everybody should be able to see that, hopefully. Awesome. So, as I said, my name is Bazile Panek. The title of my presentation is Decolonizing Environmental Decision-Making in Our Current Western Society. First, I'd like to acknowledge Nimama, Minawa, Nindede, or my mom and dad. I credit them and thank them for exposing me to the intricacies of our Anishinaabe culture. Their roles as my parents have changed how I see the world. I see the land, the animals, the plants, and as I see them as living beings because of my mom and dad's work and care for these beings as our relatives. I look up to them and their relationship with the land and everything that there is to it, and kind of incorporate that into my ways of thinking. So I look up to the both of them as huge role models. And because of them, I'm able to incorporate my foundational knowledge of our culture, language, and history that I've received from them throughout my childhood into my work as a current college student. Now I have the ability to kind of advance on the knowledge that they've given me, and I sincerely thank them for that. So some background on me. Why do I do what I do? Basically, the question, why do I do what I do? Like, what is my work centered on in academics, and why am I presenting this? Why do I feel that this is something that should be presented and talked about? I'd say that my work is centered on living in two worlds because of kind of a childhood struggle that I'm sure many Indigenous people also experience, and that is definitely living in two worlds. The struggle of being pulled back and forth between our Indigenous world and our Western society is hard on a lot of people. In Western society, our Indigenous ways of knowing and thinking aren't valued as much, and we kind of have to adapt. We're constantly being pulled back and forth. Our traditional ways of knowing aren't valued as much in Western society. So it's that struggle of living in two worlds. So we have our Indigenous world and our Western world that we live in, our two worlds that we're being pulled back and forth from. In both of these worlds acting together, I believe, at least, and this is what my work is, what I am centering my work in, is that there's kind of an action going on in the middle for me and for other individuals, I'm sure. It's the desire to decolonize and to move that middle bar towards our Indigenous world more than how we exist in our Western world. So in living in our two worlds, we should be making an effort to decolonize and make sure we're taking that bright green path instead of that burnt one. So currently, as we are decolonizing, we must live in our two worlds, but try to move that bar towards the left, towards that Indigenous world. So I think that this is what my work is centered in living in two worlds and decolonizing. So there is this argument in whether or not, this argument in Indian country, whether or not we can decolonize colonial systems. A lot of people say no, and they immediately say no, but I believe that we should at least try for right now in order to create better lives for Indigenous people who are having to live in these two worlds. The least we can try to do is decolonize these colonial systems until we can be fully decolonized and we're far enough down that green path to where we won't need to turn around. So I think we should try to at least make that effort to decolonize. So as I mentioned, when we ask that question of can we decolonize colonial structures, something like environmental decision making, our answer is initially, it's often no, because of our interactions with the United States government or these kind of environmental decision making in what we have to deal with in terms of regulations or policies. It's kind of this colonial process of policies and submitting reports and all this crazy stuff. And we kind of, in its current state, we believe that we can't decolonize it. It's hard to believe that this is possible, but I think we can look a little more into it, and hopefully that I can kind of add some information on how we can do that. Before we start to discuss environmental justice and public participation in environmental decision-making, it'd be good to refresh our minds on what those things are. So Melinda Downing of the Department of Energy states that environmental justice is based on the idea that in a democracy, when everyone participates meaningfully in a process, whose procedures and substance they understand, no group should be affected unequally by a decision. So public participation devises fair procedures that give all members of a community a voice, especially the politically powerless. We shouldn't have to be diplomats in order to be included in the decision-making table when we're the ones who are interacting with this environment every single day. Citizens should be able to participate as equal partners in every stage of the decision-making process. And public participation allows us to make decisions and determines what happens in our communities. Other communities benefit by our burdens as Indigenous people, laying on the land of our people and integrating our voice kind of hopefully redistributes that burdens and allows us to reach some more benefits. So I think that a lot of environmental injustices that happen today are caused by the lack of incorporating public participation in the decision, or at least the lack of actually incorporating public concerns and input into the decision-making process. As an example, we'll use as an example for an environmental injustice that was caused by the lack of valuing public participation, we'll use the case of the Ogoni people versus Shell in showing that the lack of incorporating public concerns and input into the decision-making process has caused catastrophes to happen. The Ogoni people are located in the Ogoni people are a group of indigenous people that are located in southern Nigeria in the River State region of the Niger River Delta. Traditionally, these people have practiced agriculture and fishing, and they've also practiced forms of animism in which all natural phenomena, the living beings, have a soul and that they're spiritual beings. So the Niger River Delta is known to them as a god whom they worship as a living spiritual being, providing them water to drink, providing them food. So they revere the river as a high being. Their community has always been focused on communal agreement within their quote unquote government to act on any decisions, especially environmental decisions relating to the river, relating to their agriculture and fishing. With leadership's positions are spread throughout the community, there are many different leaders and representatives that have communal agreements and that public participation. So Royal Dutch Shell began extracting oil from an identified oil field in the Niger River Delta in 1958 without the indigenous community's consultation or even consent. Even if they did consult, obviously, they wouldn't have taken that into consideration. This has led to 15 years of thousands of different oil spills that have happened, causing an estimated amount of 2.1 million barrels of oil spilled into the river that the Ogoni people know as a god, just totally poisoned. This obviously caused soil and water contamination to happen directly. In areas of where the land wasn't even directly affected, the groundwater was still poisoned by the spills. In 1990, the movement for survival of Ogoni people was established by Ken Saro-Wiwa. He was the person in the last slide, the picture that I had included of him, because people were dying and their cultures and fishing practices were dying and farming was dying. Imagine having to establish an organization called the Movement for Survival of your people. Unfortunately, I think imagining that is a little easier for us to imagine than we'd like, but the survival of your people. Imagine having to establish an organization where that's in the name. Operations of the pipeline were suspended in 1993, but the Ogoni people are still feeling the effects of the lack of public participation and valuing public voices from the pipeline. Over 4,000 people were killed by the Nigerian government, actually, that tried to stop protesters because of their interests with Shell. Cleanup efforts are very slowly happening. So I'm definitely leaving a lot of their effort and struggles out of this because of time constraints, I guess, and we could speak for hours about the Ogoni people versus Shell. And I'm leaving out especially the effort of Ken Saro-Wiwa and the Ogoni Nine and all of the other Ogoni people. And I don't mean to diminish this atrocity, but I mean to at least provide an example of what happens when communities aren't consulted with and when their government doesn't recognize their voices. So the big question of the afternoon is acknowledging that public participation is important, is how can we decolonize environmental decision-making in order to decrease environmental injustices like the Ogoni people versus Shell and increase the equity of voices in the decision-making process? So that brings me to Indigenous perspectives on environment and environmental decision-making. This includes animacy, representative leadership, valuing all voices, and public participation. Yesterday, Dr. Kimmerer, I got to see a little bit of her talk. She mentioned the grammar of animacy. Our reverence and respect for our environment is ingrained in our languages, the idea of animacy, that living beings like trees, animals, and even rocks have a spirit, intelligence, and power. One word I use to describe this is a sabakeshi. So translated literally, this word refers to the net maker. This is our word for spider. In creating this word, the net maker, we have observed that the spider, making his intricate nets and strong webs that support families of spiders and provide food, we've recognized that the spider has an intelligence. He has the ability to create, and that net maker, deserves animacy and reverence. Another example is copper. Ontonagon bands, today is known as KBIC, Keweenaw Bay Indian Community, has regards to copper as a living being, and evidence of this can be found within the language used by the Ontonagon band within a 1964 bilingual petition sent by 6 Ojibwe leaders to Washington. So it's kind of that physical evidence that is showing the reverence of copper and the animacy of it. So in this petition in 1964, they stated their complaints about unfulfilled treaty promises. Copper within this document is referred to as an animate being. Describing copper as an animate object proves the Ojibwe's elevated status of copper and reinforces the idea that they believe the mineral to be a living being. Copper is so known to Western society as something to be stolen from the earth and sold for money. Indigenous people do not view copper this way. In the animacy of living beings, there's a complete inversion of the sense of human domination over the environment that is presented so often in Western society. So let's talk about our Dodame, our clan system. So this is known as the social order and provided a structure for tribal councils and government pre-colonial times, as well as today and in other forms. There are 7 original clans, each with their unique responsibilities and purpose. I'm sure we know this, but Migizi and Dodame, that's my clan, and I'm sure many of you have clans and understand the clan system. But each family, which was a clan, appointed a member to the council of Dodame, showing that trait of representative leadership and incorporating the voices of all families. And the voices of all families were valued in this council and in environmental decision making that happened within the council. So Ogamog, or the leaders of the council, reached consensus before they had the authority to deliver and act. If one person still disagreed, conversations would go on in order to make sure that the decision being made was beneficial to all, at least in some way, especially in terms of that environmental decision making. Our Dodame, or our clan system, shows the equity of value of voices. Even if one person disagrees, their disagreement matters. The symbolic petition on the right is familiar to all of us. We've seen it. It's what Chief Buffalo brought on his trip to Washington. It symbolized the Ogamog, or the leaders that came with him, by portraying the clans that they belonged to. The crane on the far right is actually symbolizing Chief Buffalo, because that is his clan, the Crane clan, and his brain and heart are connected to everyone's brain and heart, the people that came with him, symbolizing and representing that they have reached consensus and that he is identifying the constituents on whose behalf he is speaking on, in a form of representative leadership and decision making that relates to the environment. Treaty negotiations are a great example to look for environmental decision making, because we have Indigenous people making decisions about what was going to happen with our mother, with all our relations, and with the land. George Manypenny, Commissioner of Indian Affairs in the 1850s, said once, negotiating treaties with the Indians takes forever. Like an annoyed teenager. Not a direct quote, I paraphrased that a little bit, but that's pretty much what he said. Well, it took forever because those present at the treaty decision-making table refused to make quick decisions regarding the environment. They weren't just going to sign away their land without thought. This is our land and our water and our relations that we're talking about. Large groups were showing up to these treaty negotiations and had long, difficult conversations about what was being presented. To illustrate that, if I find my book, wherever it went, oh, there it is. To illustrate that idea of large groups showing up, I'm going to read a short quote from this book, Ogamog, by Carrie Miller. So Johann George Cole described one such treaty gathering at La Pointe, today known as Madeline Island or Mooning-Winniconning, in 1853. Like the women, young persons in our meetings at La Pointe always sat in the center of the circle, close to the place where the American agents have their table and where the speakers stand. Some of them, who were very old, were allowed chairs to sit on. The other old men sat together in the grass near them. Further out, the young fellows lay about in groups. So this illustrates and represents the representation and diversity of voices that were happening at these treaty negotiations. The will of the community had to be consulted, and we had to reach some sort of consensus to make an environmental decision, which is why it took so long, these long conversations with so many people, and had to reach at least some sort of consensus. Now we ask the question, well, have Indigenous peoples' ideas of environmental decision-making and sustainability and how to care for our earth and that animacy, do we know that that works and that's the right way to think about our environment, or is this Western science and Western society the real way or the better way to think of our earth? Well, I think, of course, we know that Indigenous ways of living is the more sustainable way to live and to think about the environment. If we look at a timeline of modern human societies, this is definitely not to scale, definitely not. But we can see that small scale societies, indigenous societies, have existed for 200,000 plus years. These small scale societies have shared reciprocity with the land and the plant and the animal beings, generosity and care for the communities and the land, and knowledge on how to care for this land sustainably. Large-scale societies have existed for around 6,000 years. These societies are associated with hierarchy, with human domination over our world and the environment, expansion, centralized governments, and an increasing population. Global scale societies have existed for around the last 500 years or so, with the rise of industrialism, the beginnings of resource extraction, commercialization of our earth. Capitalism and money have literally touched every corner of our earth, from the smallest grain of sand to the largest mountain. There has been a sharp population increase since global scale societies have been established. And in recent years, we've dealt with climate change, and the earth is sick because of colonialism and capitalism in these larger scale societies that have bred hierarchy and expansion. So maybe, just maybe, we should integrate and value Indigenous knowledge that we have about the land and sustainability a little more than Western science. Maybe it's something to think about when that knowledge has existed for 200,000 plus years. Maybe, just maybe, that's the right way that we should think about our Earth if a society has been able to exist for 200,000 plus years. Now I am hoping to present kind of a framework for adapting our current environmental decision-making to live in two worlds. It retains some of our traditional values and while still being able to exist within our Western society, while still being able to navigate those governmental policies and things that aren't don't relate to our Indigenous ways of knowing. This can either serve as something just to remember when you're in your meetings with environmental policymakers or making environmental decisions, or it could possibly be a framework that could be utilized at some point in a more structured setting. So let's use the medicine wheel as a visual framework. Within our medicine wheel, we know that the 4 stages of life are visualized. I'm sure we're all familiar with this. But beginning in the eastern direction, we have our child, and then southern direction, our youth, adult, and then the elder in that northern direction. Your place within these 4 stages can not only be determined by your age, I believe, and the 4 stages of life, but I believe it can be by your amount of knowledge, though, that knowledge that you carry. Our elders are known to have a lot of knowledge and to be respected. So our children on the other end have some of that knowledge carried over from that past life, but they're learning everything again, just born, and they kind of have a limited amount of knowledge and ability to relay that. So let's keep these ideas in mind as we build our framework. So Oje Tuda, let's build it. Let's build a framework that visualizes a more equitable and decolonized way of thinking when making environmental decisions. US agencies, we are going to place the US agencies and government organizations in that eastern direction because they most closely align with the child, being the youngest in age and honestly having the least knowledge about the land. Tribal governments, they belong in the youth direction. They have some more knowledge about the environment and they'll be placed there. So participation in environmental decision-making often ends here. It happens so often that no other bodies or any people are included in the environmental decision-making. But there are still two other directions to fill for our equitable environmental decision-making framework. So we're going to place our people in the adult direction. Tribal governments and US agencies often make decisions that benefit just themselves as a tribe or as a larger body without thinking of our people on an individual level or themselves as on an individual level sometimes. Our people are the ones who are actually interacting with our environment. They belong here because they have the one-on-one relationship with our land. We communicate with these living beings on a daily basis. We believe that the earth is our relative, and we should be included in that conversation. Finally, our Northern Elder direction will place all our relations there, our plant and animal relatives. They have the most knowledge about the environment, and we should constantly be looking to them for knowledge in how to care for our environment sustainably. The earth shows us the way. Kinumage means the earth shows us the way. We require the knowledge of all our relations in order to make positive environmental decisions. We require their participation in the environmental decision-making process. On a larger scale, we need to learn how to listen to them speak to us. They will show us the way. When we keep this framework in mind and what we've talked about today and throughout the conference, we start to begin the process of decolonizing our environmental decision-making. When we keep this framework in mind, every direction, including the animal and plant beings, have a role and participate in environmental decision-making. And it should be this way in order to make a sustainable earth for ourselves. A quote that I use to explain the process of decolonizing and living in two worlds that kind of sums up my presentation and what I've presented today is by Mel Tom in a statement of the National Indian Youth Council in March of 1962. He says, "We believe in a future with high principles derived from the values and beliefs of our ancestors." So there is a future where it is possible to exist with values and beliefs of our ancestors integrated into our everyday lives in our Western society as we're on our way down the greener path. So miigwech bizindawiye, thank you all for listening. I hope you enjoyed what I had to present, and it's something to look forward to. Our youth are coming up and have a larger seat at the table in terms of environmental decision making. My email is at the bottom left there. If you want to have a conversation or anything, feel free to contact me there, and I'd love to talk and love to have some discussion. But miigwech bizindawiye, thank you all for listening. Misa you.
All right, miigwech Bazile. Now we have time for a Q&A session. So as folks are typing their questions into the chat, we can get going here. Well, we really appreciated your keynote. I guess just to get the ball rolling as far as questions here, I guess you just maybe a comment that I had, you kind of talk about decolonizing as far as your work in academics and environmental decision making. And one thing that, I kind of have thought about as I went through my educational process too, is there really a distinction between the decolonizing and possibly indigenizing or maybe re-indigenizing? And have you thought about that, or maybe can you maybe respond to that?
Yeah, I think the time aspect, and I just kind of heard about indigenizing a little bit. There was this phrase that was like exist, resist, indigenize, decolonize. So I think it might be a time thing, honestly. Indigenize, for me, I kind of think it could mean to change your perspectives as an Indigenous person in a Western society, to kind of like indigenize your way of thought. And decolonizing is more of that action aspect of actual tangible changes that you could be made in order to decolonize. Like this environmental decision framework is an act of decolonization, not indigenizing, I'd say. I guess could be indigenizing, but I think they're very closely related, obviously. But I think of decolonizing more as structural change and actually making decolonial actions on our colonial systems, such as environmental decision making, or the Native American Student Association at NMU. We decolonized our organizational structure. So yeah, I think it's a time thing, honestly.
Interesting. Awesome. Just checking the chat to see if we have any more questions. Are we any more questions? Oh, here we go. So I don't know if you can see in the chat, but I'll read it to you. Do you think that is something that should and or can be replicated by all TCUs as far as decolonizing, the organizational structure?
Can you remind me on TCUs?
Oh yeah, sorry. Tribal colleges and universities.
Got it. Yeah, totally. That makes sense. Let's see. So do you think that is something that can be replicated? Yeah, I think it can, and I think it should. I think that it's possible, especially within tribal colleges and universities. There's the ability to live in two worlds with what I presented, that exists in harmony, kind of living in two worlds in the act of decolonizing, while we kind of go farther down that green path. It's the act of indigenizing and decolonizing our organizational structures to make them more equitable. We can transition our tribal colleges and universities in their hierarchical structures of we have our president up here, and he's going to make all the decisions for our university, and he's going to be at the top, and usually a male. That's another colonial thing, I guess. So these people are at the top in hierarchical tribal college university. When we can make structural change and should make structural change to our organizational leadership systems within universities and tribal colleges and universities, to make more equitable decisions, to include more voices in the leadership, to kind of distribute that leadership and make communal decisions. And I think structurally we can make those changes and should make those changes. Hope that answers that.
Yeah, no, I think you did a great job in answering that. That kind of brings to mind, you mentioned Dr. Kimmerer's presentation a lot in your presentation. And one thing that she consistently talked about was the land aspect, right? And treating the land as a relative and that having its voice and granting it, rights, as a being, right? And trying to figure out how we would incorporate that into decolonizing or indigenizing, structure for sure. Let's see. Well, and then a follow-up question, how do we get upper leadership at colleges to accept those changes in decision-making, right?
Dang, I wish I knew the answer to that one. Well, I guess for me, at least the progress that I've made at Northern Michigan University with maybe the official recognition of Indigenous Peoples Day. I'm also working on a decolonization exhibit, kind of an art museum exhibit. We're also in the process of creating a physical land acknowledgement piece on campus. And we also have a Native American Studies program. There are kind of these smaller actions that add up to decolonizing our universities. With Indigenous Peoples Day, it took years and years of talking to the Board of Trustees. It was exhausting, but getting upper leadership at the colleges to accept those changes is, I think, that constant small changes that we can make for ourselves and indigenizing our way of thoughts in academics, and to continue to voice our opinions to the leadership. And eventually they're kind of like making that slow transition into, oh, Indigenous Peoples Day is recognized now. Now let's do a land acknowledgement physical piece. Now let's have a diversity, equity, and inclusion general education requirement. Now let's do this other kind of thing from there. So I think that's a huge aspect. Another thing is finding the non-Native people at the university to collaborate with you. We collaborated with the Associated Students of Northern Michigan University, which is the student government here. Unfortunately, leadership, especially if they're white leadership, they're more willing to listen to white people. So that collaboration is sometimes required in order to make decolonial changes, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, you bring up such a great point, the importance of allies and, building those bridges as we move forward, and decolonizing our structures for sure. Another question is from Mike Dockery. He says, what are your plans for the future, post-degree or degrees maybe?
Yeah, I think, what do I want to be when I grow up? I'm planning, I graduate next year, so planning on attending grad school, and from there maybe a doctoral degree. I want to teach people, I want to educate about Native American culture, language, and history. So any way I can do that is what I want to do, in any form, any way I can do that. So that's what I want to be when I grow up.
Awesome. Well, you definitely educated, us today, and we definitely appreciate it so much. So thank you for that wonderful keynote. We say Chi-miigwech to Bazile for sharing with us.
Miigwech.
Let's see.
Yeah, I'm totally open to hang out and answer more questions. So
yeah, sure. But we can do another one. Here's one from familiar face. So do you think it's possible for tribes to decolonize our systems that were forced upon us?
Yeah, this is definitely from prior conversations with Melanie, my mom, that decolonizing our tribal councils is a great example of this. Tribal councils that exist so often in our tribes was a structure provided by the Indian Reorganization Act of 1934. So that's obviously a colonial structure that was provided, that's hierarchical with the chair and that hierarchy of it. So to decolonize those structures, at least, the tribal council is what we know to make a lot of the decisions. So decolonizing our tribal councils could start with integrating more voices. I've also created a medicine wheel framework that is kind of a separate project maybe, that provides a framework for organizations to decolonize. It's actually what we have implemented within the Native American Student Association at NMU. We've actually implemented a decolonial structure into a student organization that exists within Western society. So at least on our level, we found that it's possible, and maybe it can be possible for other greater tribal governments and kind of dismantling what we've been provided. I think we have the education now to do so. There's some amazing people out there creating some positive change. Positive change. So I think it's possible to do so, especially now as we venture onto that brighter green path.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And one more comment, it sounds like Mike Dockery wants you to reach out to him when you're looking at grad schools as far as University of Minnesota.
Yeah, I've actually, Mike Dockery, yeah, I've, a few people have told me that, so I'll definitely do that for sure. Miigwech.
Awesome. Well, I can echo being his first student. It's definitely a good place to go. And I was kind of the dry run, so to speak, but definitely highly recommend.
Yeah, Miigwech. I'm looking forward to communicating with everybody. And yeah.
Cool. Well, Miigwech. So moving on, we just want to say again, thank you to Bazile for that wonderful keynote. And we also want to say, Wana Katan and Mawani, thank you everybody. Thank you much. We all hope that you had a great time and learned some new things. We would like to take this opportunity now to give a special shout out and a match Wawanan, or a big thank you to our event organizer Sara Smith. We couldn't have done this all without you and your hard work. So we really appreciate it. And thank you, Sara.
Thank you, Tom. And big thanks to Bazile. That was an amazing keynote. And I look forward to seeing what you do in the future as well. I want to say, Yongo, thank you for everyone who has attended our Shifting Seasons Summit. This was our first time doing the summit virtually. So we thank you with your patience, especially when there have been some technical difficulties that we've encountered. We are very hopeful to have our next Shifting Season Summit to be in person once again, so we can build those networking connections in person. I would also like to give a big thanks to all of our speakers and our moderators, our note takers, and our MC, Tom, as well, who have been wonderful the past 3 days with the summit. And lastly, Yongo, to our partners and our staff who have also helped with putting the summit together. We couldn't have done it without you as well. So just a few other things before we wrap up today. So we'll actually be wrapping up a bit earlier than has planned. So a reminder that we will be sending out another email with a link to the session surveys, and we ask you to please fill one out for each session that you attended. This will help us with our future summits and also any future presentations that we do. In addition, there'll be a separate email for a exit survey as well. And so from that survey itself, we will be randomly selecting 100 participants to receive gifts from us as a way to show our appreciation to all of you who have attended. And so during the next following months, we will be putting together our final report and materials from the summit. And some of those materials that will be based off of the trainings and sessions we all went through this week. Once those are ready, we'll be posting them on the Northeast Indigenous Climate Resilience Network website, where most of you registered. If you have not, I will put the link in the chat box right now for all of you to check that out. So when we have those materials, we'll be putting everything on there for you. All the sessions have been recorded as well. And so those from the first 2 days are already up on Pathable for you to review in case you missed them, or if you were in a different session. We'll be doing the same thing after today with these. And so just a reminder that we will also be hosting a special Earth Day event tomorrow, starting at 10 a.m. Central, and it'll go until 2 p.m. on the event site. So if you can, please join us as well. So with that, I want to say Yungo, big thanks to everybody. We really enjoyed you all here with us. And to end the summit in a good way, we would like to welcome the Wolf River Singers to give us a nice traveling song. So I will turn it over to them.
Yeah.